The dog and I are up here chilling on the domain, on the big water tanks, these big hunks of concrete. That's probably the rumbling you can hear in the background. There's a bit of pipe work going on. The domain is a subtle place. It's a tacit place. It's a place filled with vagueness and weirdness. There's a whole bunch of things that go on here and have happened here. We're going to have a look around and see how we feel. It's an interesting place. Right in the middle of the capital city, there's a hill covered in bushland. But what goes on here? Well, we're going to try and find out. The domain is an interrupted reserve of scrubby bushland between the River Derwent and the main area of Hobart, Tasmania. So large that you can never see it all in one go. White gum grassland growing in shallow soil on dolerite. Today what is left has been ringed in at the edges by a noose of freeways. The dog is standing on this gnarly old cannon. We're both standing at the front of the Domain gunpowder magazine. It was built in 1851 by the Royal Engineers to store gunpowder. This building wasn't the only way of storing that material back in the day, but it was one of the safest ways. This building is very, very strong, and it's designed to be fire resistant, because if you get a flame going on there, blammo. Most people in Hobart probably don't even know it's here. The magazine was built double roofed of solid sandstone, capable of storing 1,600 whole barrels. To overcome the danger of sparks, the only metals used were copper, bronze and brass. Ventilation was constructed indirect to prevent embers from bushfires entering. The facility actually remained Hobart's main gunpowder storage right up until 1970. In the early period, gunpowder was also stored on ships kept afloat offshore in the Derwent. The Aladdin was one such vessel, the gunpowder hulk being kept in the capital from 1885 to 1902. The Soldiers Memorial Avenue, comprising of 520 trees first planted in 1918 and 1919, commemorate the soldiers, mainly from Hobart, who died in the Great War. The trees are a mix of Himalayan and Atlantic cedars, as well as blue atlas and Italian cypress. As the trees eventually die, they need to be replanted. They run from halfway up the domain down to the cenotaph. One of the first appropriations of the domain was by building the Queen's Battery back in the 1840s, formed part of a network of harbour defences across the city. Later on, in 1925, the cenotaph was constructed. In 1905, the Boer War Memorial was placed at the very entrance of Hobart. The layout of the capital has changed since then. At the time, the idea was that a soldier in the statue would see all of the other soldiers coming and going. Sculptured by Benjamin Shepherd. His wife's brother had been killed in the South African conflict. The statue was sent off for casting to London. Such an excellent work of art it was that they made their own copy, which exists in Halifax, West Yorkshire. Earlier monument, one to Charles Meredith. It was originally erected as a fountain in 1885. It has not functioned for yonks. The prominent Hobart politician, Meredith, was an early environmentalist, introducing a bill to protect the black swan from extinction. Since British settlement, the land has been under continuous pressure for development. Set aside as a kind of people's park, it was protected by an Act of Parliament in 1858. Nevertheless, it's been built upon and carved apart. The annual location of the Hobart Regatta, the nation's second oldest, it commenced in 1838 and has been on every year, bar two. Since the Second World War, sideshows have added carnival aspect to proceedings. The largest terminus in the state was built in Hobart in 1871, taking people and goods up the western shore of the Derwent and across the island. It's all gone now. Today, the station entrance has been turned into the ABC. The rest is a mix of development inertia. For a moment in time, the old station wasn't good enough, and there was a dream of replacing it with a better one that would deliver passengers right into the heart of town. When Premier Ogilvy died suddenly in 1939, any hopes of a grander new project also departed. It was perhaps the beginning of the slow retraction of train travel in Tasmania. Domain House, erected in 1849 in a Gothic architectural look. It served as the Hobart High School before it became the University of Tasmania from 1890 to 1963, when UTAS moved to Sandy Bay. The popular jogging and dog-friendly walking spot is Max's Infinity Loop. The dual surface track was named after local running enthusiast Maxwell George Cherry. Under the new current loop is the old road. For a long time, you used to be able to drive your car around it. Today, it's pretty much only used by people on their feet, like it was to begin with. First human occupation was by unknowable Aboriginal explorers. For eons, various bands of these people returned. The dog's occupying himself with a stick, and I'm leaning against this post. This post belonged to a gate. You can see the two posts with the spots where the bit in the middle would have spun or swung on its hinges. Wherever you get a gate, you're going to get a fence. So why were there a whole bunch of fences, not just running along this way, but that way and this way, crisscrossing all over the place up here on the domain? A 1927 map of Hobart town as a kind of a cartoon. Back in the day, the domain was used to be leased by the government for the grazing of sheep. To keep the sheep safe, they were held within a whole series of fences, and to get between the fences, there were a series of gates. Constable Malcolm Cleary patrolled the domain from 1865 to 1884. Animals grazing were monitored by him at the main gate, which was at his home, a house at the bottom of what became known as Cleary's Gates Road. The government created a quarry to mine gravel to build roads. The Hobart City Council still controls these quarries today. Locked up like a bird in a cage, the 1928 Marshall steamroller. The machine was used to build roads and is still functional. On special occasions, it's let out and the whistle can be heard. Passing another dormant quarry is the Brooker Freeway, opened in 1954. It cuts off the domain like a moat round a castle. An 1885 map of Hobart, a circle marked Old Quarry. You can see it as it was, just disturbed stone. The most modern Hobart Aquatic Centre is now on that spot. Before it, though, was the original Olympic swimming pool. When it was demolished, something happened. The demolished materials from the pool had to be dumped. In previous decades, they might have been poured into the Derwent somewhere to reclaim land. They dumped a lot of them on the domain itself. Some of it was used to create an embankment next to the athletic centre. A glebe is a piece of land owned by a church. The glebe is a suburb that sits on the domain. It was originally 3 separate glebes owned by 3 separate churches: Roman Catholic, Trinity and Presbyterian. Over time, the churches sold the land and now it's homes. The TCA ground. The Oval was home to the Tasmanian Cricket Association from 1882 to 1987, before it moved across the river to the Bellerive Oval. Among other things, greyhound racing was performed there. In 2001, AC/DC played. Pavilion Point is the name of the place on the domain where the Tasman Bridge now leaves the western shore. The name came from the pavilion once erected there to view the regatta, which was also originally there. Here it is depicted in 1852 by Ludwig Becker. Today, the main building there is Government House. In 1840, the convict architect James Blackburn's design was approved. Work began before being ordered to halt. Walls were demolished and foundations strangely filled in. In 1853, Blackburn's original plans were adapted. Teak from the broken up convict hulk Anson was used. Using on-site sandstone, the quarry, which is now a deep pond. 1860 depiction by William Porton Kay shows a building and a scene that doesn't look super Australian. If Government House is the proudest structure on the domain, the most shameful are the tents. Historically, the domain has been used by people experiencing homelessness. The practice seemed to go away for a long time, but in recent years it has become a thing all over again. The old zoo kept animals in cages for entertainment from 1923 to 1937. Aerial images from 1943 show the place filled with oil silos. The Navy used the site until 1991. Today, it all just sort of sits there, waiting for the memories to fade away. The old wireless station at the Pinnacle is a humble weatherboard structure. The building was constructed by the Commonwealth Government with the aim of a chain of coastal wireless stations to communicate with shipping. The 180-foot high mast was made of Oregon bolts bolted together. Initially, all communication was made by Morse code. In 1912, it was used to relay information as part of Douglas Mawson's Antarctic expedition. In the past, the domain has been used more freely by families and other people for partaking in pedestrian activities. Today, large sections of the domain are in fact closed at night. This does not, however, prevent adults from partaking in adult activities there at all hours. From 1959, the Australian newsprint mills had a storage shed. Giant rolls of paper were brought to there from Boyer, near New Norfolk. The largest weatherboard structure in the Southern Hemisphere was demolished in 1996. You'd almost not know that it had ever been there now. Next to the facility was the Botanical Gardens train station. Long gone now. The Royal Tasmania Botanical Gardens, initially established in 1818 by Governor Sorrell, real development began in 1827. If you'd ever wondered why the Botanical Gardens is where it is, it's because of this. This green grass is actually a rivulet. There's a small amount of water flowing through it at the moment because it's the middle of summer. Even in winter, it actually doesn't get that much water. The domain itself is drought prone. Despite Hobart getting quite a lot of rain, the domain itself doesn't because of where it is in relation to the River Derwent and the larger mountain above the city. When they set up the Botanical Gardens, they needed fresh water, and this was it for quite a while. Of course, now the water not only goes through a pipe and comes out the other end in a big pond, there's also the whole hydro system. They can turn on taps and there are sprinklers everywhere. But in the beginning, this very modest stream allowed them to build the Botanical Gardens. In 1964, tentative plans for an open auditorium were forwarded. Had it not failed to gain traction, it would have been built in the small valley that holds the same watercourse above the Botanical Gardens. Each year, almost 200 cars get stolen in Hobart, and a lot of them find themselves being dumped on the domain. I'm of the understanding that this is a 1957 Holden FE. It's been here for a while. You can tell all the soft bits of the car, they're gone, and a lot of the hard bits are gone too. So maybe it was not crashed here from somewhere, but dumped when it was already trash. I don't know. At the moment, it's being used by people that go orienteering. It's got a number on the side, 761. So if you're into that sort of thing, you can come up here and collect your points. It's an example of if you leave some hard rubbish somewhere in the bush or anywhere, if it's there for long enough, it might become interesting after a while. And I think because it has a use now, and because it is just this sort of bit of weirdness in the bushland here on the domain, it's a reason enough to allow this trash to stay.